So to start off with, I'm a hurricane supporter. And my job today was to get as many stickers into the bathroom as I possibly can. So I think we've managed to succeed on that one. So my name's Adam Dodds. I'm a sort of research director at a company called IDC, which is sort of a bit of a multinational strategy and research company. What I cover is this concept of brokerage, which is sort of platforms at scale from a cloud perspective, and I do that at a worldwide level. I run the Channels and Alliances program at a regional level, which is all about new partnerships that are being formed. So when you think about your business and you think about how you grow your addressable and your accessible market and you start to do more digital things in your interactions with your customers, you've got to go and find new partners to work to see what the collective aggregate of your information can do around unlocking new value potential. So I'm sort of all over that. And then across Australia and New Zealand, I do a bunch of stuff around sort of cloud and strategy and a few other bits and pieces. So today's conversation is very much centred obviously on some New Zealand research. I'm going to land you up top, which is sort of this thing about digital. I'm not going to go into digital transformation, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Give you a sense of where investment and focus lies from a market perspective. Land it down into some of the context with regards to security and some of the problems that I'm seeing. We're not going into the detail of security. We're sort of really staying around sort of the governance and management elements of it. And I've got 20 minutes. And I've got more slides than what 20 minutes calls for. So things will sort of, I'll be running roughshod over a lot of it. So look, we're there. You know, at the moment it's an immutable truth that technology is hitting every industry, every customer, everyone. And it's hitting it at a pace where in New Zealand there's now 20% of the market who actually don't believe that they can keep up with it. So they're flat out right said, look, we get it, we get there's an opportunity, but friggin' it's too fast for us at this point in time. So there's really interesting questions being asked at the moment around what it actually means. And ultimately, digital's like that thing that cloud was 5 years ago, well, probably 9 years ago, where everybody went, oh, my interpretation of it is this. And what it did is it just sort of galvanised the thinking that you had across the organisation, whereby if everybody has an interpretation, then they're all more willing to move forward rather than sort of be seen to be heading off, you know, disparately to go and do their own bits and pieces. With sort of around 70% of the market now saying that they've got executive engagement in technology making decisions, with over 86% of the market now saying that they've got some sort of digital style strategy, with, you know, organisations now starting to recognise that their business is not only made up of the traditional, you know, functional structural elements of the business, they're starting to think about what digital leadership looks like inside their organisation. It's not the usuals, may not be the CFO, may not be the COO, may not be the CIO. Instead, it's a group of people who can cohesively think about the business outcome that they're driving towards and then bring to bear a bunch of solution sets and behind that to go and make something actually happen. Why is this important? It's important because sort of a bit on our own. If you look at Australia, I can tell you with knowledge and with science that you know, Australia sort of are about 9 to 12 months behind. They're focused on digital transformation. Whereas when you actually ask businesses at the moment across New Zealand what they're interested in and where they're focusing, it's around things like knowledge management, information management, and looking at customer centricity. And when you look at those two as an aggregate, they are more the sort of the do components of digital than they are the sort of the have components, which are more traditional ways of profitability and productivity and all of that other good stuff. So we're off. How we're doing it, we've got about 65% of CIOs reporting into the CEO. The rest of them still report into the COO and CFO. Structurally, that means something. It means something because it ultimately means that they either have to bring in alternate resources to go and drive the programs that they need associated with that, or conversely, you start to see a bit of a partiality around the weighting of investment, whether or not it's aligned to operational efficiency or whether or not it's aligned to, you know, more financial governance than it is opposed to, you know, really unleashing what's possible from a technical perspective. This is the best representation I've seen so far with regards to what digital actually means. Why is this important? Because it gives you a sort of a future mapped architecture of the things that you're heading towards. Obviously, there's going to end up with new customer interactions. We know that's happening. We know the focus at the moment is really around consistency. How your salespeople or your edge people reach your customers has to be as consistent as if your customers come to you via an application or some sort of digital style interaction. Doesn't matter what it is. Same point in time, you're going to end up with new channel or go-to-market style of partnerships. You know, I'm working with banks who want to be cloud service providers. I'm working with insurance companies that want to offer insurance products into organisations such as yourselves. I'm looking at ecosystems of businesses that have recognised that they actually might overlap a little bit in some of the areas that they compete, but they're willing to do away with that, knowing that they could actually get a 3x or 4x accessible market by partnering better together. Got lots of sensor stuff happening. You know, the realities of it are whether or not you choose to do it as a business or the vendor community that supplies into you does it, it's becoming more pervasive. The challenge is going to be how do you aggregate all of that information, how do you consolidate it, and how do you actually make it useful? And ultimately, where do you put that information such that the insight that you gain from it allows you to be more responsive? And these are real great questions that are happening at the moment. I've been talking about this for about 2 years, but the reality of it is, you know, enterprise businesses don't actually need to exist anymore. What that means is you're going to start to see the disestablishment of large organisations as they start to partner more, not less. Why? Because if you can have a more flexible consumption construct, it ultimately means greater profitability for the business or greater agility. So you start to see new partnerships starting to form, and you start to see new ecosystems. And the slide before this, or 3 before it, said you're only as strong as the weakest link. And that's absolutely correct. You know, the realities of it are you're going to partner more, not less. And ultimately, unless your procurement business and your technology business and your execs are aligned in this, you're not going to do the proper evaluation of all of that partner community as you better integrate with that partner community, knowing how exposed you could be as a result of them not doing the right things. Doesn't matter how good you are, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what your partners do. It's, you know, from a service provider point of view, it's actually those really sort of unique ecosystem supply chain partners where exposure is really high, and we've seen enough of that in the press to worry about it. This stuff here and how it connects, that's the gold. And yes, they do talk about data being the new gold. They do talk about it being, you know, having a sense of value. But at the moment, irrespective of whether or not it's on balance sheet or not on balance sheet, the challenge for you guys in your businesses is to identify those pockets of information, be they customer-orientated information, be they IP-orientated information, or even just the ability to service the business or keep it running in perpetuity. You've got to identify that. Why? Because you can't ultimately, at the end of this, talk about protecting everything. You've got to move into a space where you're actually identifying the stuff that you do need to be really considered about and really focused on. So, you know, these are sort of the architectural topology maps that we're starting to head towards. From an investment perspective, excuse the font. You guys will sort of see the slides after this, so you'll be fine around it. Hybrid is obviously king from an investment focus perspective. We've got about 50% of infrastructure still sitting on premises. From a rack perspective, we can see that there's significant shift onto off-premises, off into public cloud, and then looking at accelerating tools that allow you to orchestrate over the top of it. So bar none, that commands a lot of the mind share, and it's a lot of where the investment focus is at this point in time. But when you actually compare it to relative importance, cybersecurity smashes everything, and for the right reasons, obviously. At a director level, you know, everybody's being asked to be more compliant, more focused, more diligent. The directors are coming down and trying to scare the bejesus out of the people in the business, saying we're protected, aren't we? Right. You know, and the unfortunate thing that happens out the back of that is these young engineers say yes. Whereas the real answer is as much as we can be. And I think these are the things that we're starting to head towards at the moment, and we're going to end up in this really interesting space, and I'll get to this in the slide deck, where you do have a trade-offs decision to make. And the trade-offs decision is, what is our comfort of risk relative to our investment? The stuff around sounds really simple, but it's a dialogue that needs to be had at a business level, not at a technical level. Collaboration, look, really high number, but the brutal reality of it is collaboration is no longer about sort of voice or content. We're accelerating very quickly towards business automation type activities. There are lots of professional services businesses, lots of IT service providers all coming into the space, which is, hey, we can take a lot of that sort of persontronic type activity, we can add a bit of flow to it, and we can take away some of that sort of mid to light lifting such that you can be a bit more purposeful at the front of your business. So I love talking about New Zealand because the reality of it is, yes, we get on and do it. We're not talking about the what anymore. We're in the how component of it. And we're coming up against really big, chunky problems. And they're chunky problems that, we've got to look worldwide to where we get some sort of parity and alignment with. And from a New Zealand perspective, we have somewhat similar characteristics to the likes of Singapore. We've got somewhat similar characteristics to the likes of Norway. Not necessarily to Australia, and in reality, when you actually look at it at the moment, Australia are listening a lot to a lot of the New Zealand government strategy from an execution point of view. So it's a basic statement, but it's a really important statement. It's not about security, it's about business risk. Now, businesses are, they understand what risk is, because when they choose to attack a new market, they consider what is the risk of it. When they choose to experiment on a new initiative, they consider what the risk is. Your challenge as technology leaders inside your business is to get the execs of the organisation to start to quantify up what risk is. There's no formula or real template for actually what risk is. You have to take a position yourself in what it is, because it's you and it's your industry and it's your relative sense of maturity and your aggressiveness on the market and your volatility of the customer and some of the adjacency from a disruptive perspective around market characteristics. But you've still got to go through the exercise nonetheless. Because unless you have a sense of risk, then what is the investment in context to? You can have every bit of technology under the sun saying that you've got something covered, but the realities of it are, if it has no context to it, then the responsibility falls quite squarely on your shoulders. And that's a heavy weight to bear, especially when I've seen businesses in the last year which have gone from something to nothing in the space of months. So where you end up is you end up in this sort of thing where the analogy is almost like it's actually more like an army or a war-based strategy as opposed to an investment-based strategy, whereby you've got to take a considered understanding of where the threats might lie from a business perspective, where the value pools might lie, where is the higher ground you've got to try and get to, and how it is that you can challenge yourself to be better than what you are. Great analogy being in here, I suppose, and the fact that if you've got a team and a team's doing a bunch of stuff and they're all training together, the best way for that team to lift is for all of them to lift each other by challenging each other as much as you can. And so you start to see that demarcation between those that are sort of protecting the business on a day-to-day basis versus those that are actually trying to disrupt the business and attack the business itself to try and figure out where some of the weak points lie from an organisational point of view. Because this is it's a team-orientated activity. And interestingly, when you look at some of the strategies that are evolving, I suppose at a US and a UK level, the thing that really interests me is when you think about the people you know, it could be the person you're sitting next to, could be your supply chain that you work in, sharing more about your security posture, sharing more about the types of things that you come across is to the betterment of you both. And so we're going to end up in this really interesting situation where we're going to start to see more industry-orientated cloud or collaboration type activity going on. This is important because at the end of it, if you've got $100 million, no problem. But most people will be sort of running in the high negatives and won't be paying tax for a while if that's what their investment is. So you as a business have to take a position on Really, what is the risk position, be it 10% versus, this 0.001% risk, and therefore what's the appetite around investment and being really considered on it. If you can do that sort of thing, it gains the execs or the senior management in the business to start thinking about how is it that they can continually test themselves on where they're at today. Has our risk increased or has it decreased? What are our options on the next dollar investment that we put forward in the business? How do we break that dollar up? Is it going to be 70% towards the front of the business and 30% involved in the whole protect element of what we're doing? Or is it going to be, I suppose 80 or 20? These are questions I can't answer for you guys. They are really specific for your business. But unless you do it, then the thing that happens out the back of it is you end up with a business that is exposed. And if you're exposed and you partner with other B2B type organisations, they're going to look at your business and go, actually, when you look at a scorecard on why I might want to partner with you, you're going to score a bit lower than potentially where you were originally. This stuff's important. It's not about whether or not you're financially stable anymore. These are table stakes. It's actually about really where you are from a security maturity perspective. When you look at the market as a whole, what we do is we do this stuff in IDC where we've got to try and put everything into a framework or a template or some sort of maturity type assessment. What we do a bunch of questions, and those questions are around how do they posture, what's your structure, how do you alignment of execs. Most of your organisations will have some sort of elements around here where there's some full-time staff that are associated with security. 60% of the market in reality is sort of sitting in that naive, novice, reactive responder thing. But in reality, the goal, and notice, from a maturity point of view, this compresses this way year on year because the expectation has to increase. Really, where you're actually looking here is you're looking for, good, strong compliance. You're looking at highly iterative engagement models where you're testing and retesting yourself from an exposure point of view. You're challenging your service providers to understand how it is that you could be doing things better. You're not going, hey, we've just built this thing. Oh, now we need to think about security. I did a bit of research about a year ago, and one of the challenges that we have from a New Zealand perspective is we say security's in our top 5. And then when you actually look at the business projects or the business outcomes that we drive to, it slips to the top 10. So we become a little bit complacent in that stuff. So more mature is it's right at the front of the business. It's an engagement conversation that starts, it's robust, it's iterative. You're not afraid to be standing in front of the board or the execs to make sure that they are actually willing to sign off on the positions that you guys take. Because at the moment, I'd argue you take the position, you sort of agree amongst yourselves that it's the right thing to do, and there's a belief structure that sits above that, which is sort of a bit of a gap from my perspective. So, how am I going for time? 5 minutes. There you go. I was warned I'd get some papers up or something like that, but I just figured I'd get a bit proactive on that.
Electronic solution here.
Yeah.
I'll tell that paper,
So, these are just a couple of really clean statements. You're going to get a lot of stuff from the Microsoft guys and from the Softsource guys around this. But the reality of it is it's these simple statements that you've got to take away. It's about business risk. It's making sure that you do have the business and the board aligned. It's about taking 2 different mindsets. One is about how do you attack your business to expose the weaknesses yourselves or through your ecosystem, versus having a model in which you actually protect yourself in a run state type model. Now, you can play around with the teams in that. You can get them shifting from one side to the other, knowing that security people are innately introverted in a lot of different ways. They don't necessarily want to be challenged out of the comfort zone that they're in, but at the same point in time, you've got to try and create this high-performing team. You've got to really be able to map your business well. Understand what's required from a compliance perspective. Make no mistake, the whole government data programs around regulations, they're coming and they're going to increase year on year on year. Same point in time, every industry that you're in is going to have more and more compliance requirements from an overhead point of view. You need to be able to articulate that, especially if you're actually a company that maybe exports out of the country. You've got to make sure you've got to have all of that really well documented. You've got to know where your value pools lie in your business. Identification of all of your data assets may shape how you treat those assets a little bit differently, may shape how you govern them a bit differently. Ultimately, you end up in a space where, trajectory-wise, it's going to be hard to do because the business is going to have more data, not less. But unless you start going through that exercise of, risk and value type mapping process, how do you know where to spend your time? Because at the moment, you could do this horizontal effort, which is we're going to protect everything, but that doesn't work. There's no game strategy against that in any way, shape or form. So you've got to really try and map that out. And look, getting into the mindset of the hacking community is a good thing to do. Most organisations don't actually know that they've been exposed in any way, shape or form. There was a worldwide stat that was sort of around, which was 160 days before somebody actually realised that somebody was, they're inside the business. And now that's an average, but it's a reality. When you think about the things that you've got at the moment around what is important and why it's important, yes, they could nick some data, but ultimately if they change some data, you're as exposed. Because if you're going to start personalising from a business perspective and being a bit more customer centric, you're going to find some tension in that space, especially if you serve up to, one of your customers something that they quite considerably aren't, or expose some other information. Just think about the concept of sec DevOps. Everybody's getting this agile thing. They're getting a business needs to be more dynamic. Just put security in the front of that, and then in doing so, it'll provide you with a sense of where your posturing needs to sit, which is at the front, as it's at that development edge of your business as it interacts or changes its digital interaction with the customer. I know I've got here Chief Security Officer, have one. We get that you can't afford one in a lot of instances. So it may be that this is where you choose to partner. Because you can put these people on retainer style models, you can put them on programs where they run BCDR type strategies with your business. And this is a really interesting thing. I'm sorry, I know I'm out of time, but I'm going to take one more minute. Role play some stuff with your organisation. Walk in to a board meeting and tell them they are now facing a crisis scenario and see how they perform together. Involve your partner in the process. If you do that, then you get the opportunity for them to hold up a mirror to themselves and actually see whether or not they're a high-performing team themselves. Thank you.